Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are across the globe, welcome to the first session of IVCO 2021. We will discuss and unpack what it means to create an inclusive volunteering environment for global equality. My name is Melanie and I'm the CEO of AVI. As I'm joining the conference from Australia, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia. I recognise the continuing connection that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have to their lands and waters, and I pay my respects to elders and communities, past, present, and emerging. Today's panellists will explore with us the theme of inclusive volunteering for global equity and challenge us to think and respond in new ways. We know that volunteerism can be a powerful vehicle for change. It can break down barriers and connect communities to engage in a common purpose. But to truly foster an inclusive environment for volunteers, we must first understand what diversity and inclusion mean in the context of international volunteering and of decolonisation. As our speakers today will challenge us, diversity without decolonisation is not enough to bring equality and fairness. As the conference framing paper argues, in order to design more diverse and inclusive volunteering for development programs, it is essential to address issues of power, privilege, and structural racism. As practitioners in volunteering for development, we must work to identify the barriers and challenges to inclusive volunteering and discuss how organisations can offer greater access and ensure more equitable participation experiences. The Australian Volunteers Program, which AVI manages on behalf of the Australian Government, has been on its own journey of inclusion and diversity. The program's Indigenous Pathways, which is featured in the research, has been a powerful step in the right direction for us, and we remain committed to exploring and understanding more diverse, inclusive, and equitable volunteering. I'm looking forward to learning more over the coming days from our panellists and from the experience of other international volunteering for development organisations. Let me introduce our panellists to you. Benjamin Haas and Victor Moinina, researchers of IVCO 2021 framing paper, Inclusive Volunteering for Global Equality, Linking Decolonisation and Diversity. We will also hear from Ashraf, Patel and Erin Bateman, co-chairs of Forum Diversity and Inclusion Community of Practice, as well as Edem AGODE, Director of Programs, National Volunteering Agency of Tonga. And finally, Cristina Cruz-Hubbard, Chief Diversity Officer of Peace Corps. Welcome and thanks to each of you for sharing your insight, reflections and expertise with us.
Thank you very much, Melanie, for having us. My name is Dr. Victor Moinina. I'm co-presenting with Ben Haas. We are the authors of the position paper that is going to be looked at for this session, and I hope that it will be very much beneficial to everyone. So we have a very small agenda here. The agenda is, I'll start with the aims of the framing paper. And then we would have a discussion on the starting point. And then we'll look at diversity and decolonization, decolonial approaches in or for voluntary for development. And then we come to a brief conclusion. I hope you would get to understand why the position paper was made like this. So the aim of the paper is to summarize enablers and barriers for volunteering opportunities. When we're working on this paper together, we had a lot of thoughts in mind. What are some of the things that we think affect volunteer opportunity and how we can locate the volunteer for development within the debate of decolonizing aid and provide linkages between diversity, inclusion, and decolonization while we explore approaches and innovative policy. So from this paper, you should be able to come up with ideas as to how you can be able to look at opportunities within the volunteering sector and how we can use volunteering for development. And then also we should provide a linkage between diversity and inclusion. So over to you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. Yeah, we had some starting points for this paper because we thought they are important because in some societal context, people still discuss about it. But we thought for the IVCO context, those are very important starting points that we should kind of agree upon if we really want to discuss this topic in practice. The first one is we agree that our world is shaped by unequal and post-colonial power structures, which to a great extent are also based on structural racism as a result of colonial racist societies. The development sector, to a great extent, at least the mainstream development sector, can also be seen as a continued expression or a project of coloniality. This has been evidenced by many scholars in the last couple of decades. If you think about structural adjustment programs, conditionalities in the development sector, etc. Volunteering for development has always been a part of this decolonization debate, which is quite interesting and also important to look at. And we are aware that a lot of international NGOs and IVCOs have engaged in these debates about decolonization already. So in the paper, we also really try to focus on good practice and innovative approaches that organizations have already implemented. And the last point here on this slide is that Black Lives Matter movement and other movements are a vivid reminder of the linkages between inclusion and decolonization, or diversity and decolonization. Because ultimately, both debates are centered around questions of power, privilege, and structural discrimination, and are working with exclusive mechanisms. So if we want to decolonize volunteering for development, it's not only about the global structure, it's also to look at our national societies or local societies and the exclusive mechanisms that are at play on the local level. Over to you, Victor.
So moving forward, when we're doing the diversity and decolonization, we had to look at different dimensions of exclusion. That is, what are those things that exclude people in doing volunteerism? And we looked at the aspects of the race, the gender, the class, the disability, and the age. And we should know that all of these intersect at some point. It is also important to know that also based on the context or the place the person finds themselves, diversity can be in the form of, like I said, in the form of disability. Diversity could be in the form of a race. Diversity could be in the form of a gender. And then also, we also came to realize that intersectionality is an important analytical framework to understand a combination of privilege and or discrimination. That means that if you're discriminating, you should know that maybe because I was not able to do this, or maybe because I was not able to do that. Communication and role models, peer-to-peer communication, radicalized image of development aid in the global north, model of long-term volunteerism, resource and funding, and then legal information and circumstances. All of these were said to be barriers and enablers, especially in the global south, where people tend to look at the white savior mentality, especially when it comes to having people from the global north come in. And then model of long-term volunteerism, I'm sure my co-presenter would have to shed more light on it. Over to you, Ben.
Yeah, the model of long-term volunteering and this is very much linked also to the question of resources and legal information, where we look at people, at volunteers with disabilities, for example, but also the LGBTIQ community, where it's important to have legal information about the context of your placement. Resources, very important for people with disabilities. And in some contexts, we saw that in a case study on an Indigenous pathway program from Australian volunteers, where it was seen that it's the model of very long-term volunteering might not be applicable or very we saw in the case study of the Indigenous pathway program of the Australian volunteers that the model of long-term volunteering is not applicable and valuable for all types of volunteers. For some volunteers, it's more difficult to leave their communities for such a long time. So to think about different models will be very important when we talk about diversity and inclusion and in terms of enablers. The last part of our presentation and also in the paper is to look at practical approaches that organizations and especially IVCOs have already applied. And it's very interesting to look at that those discussions about decolonization already started in the beginning of the 80s. Glyn Roberts from the UK was an important figure in the Global North criticizing those programs. And it's interesting to see now where we are at a couple of decades later. The approaches that we identified that as well from theory, but also from practice that IVCOs look at or could look at. The first one is rethinking development as a foundational concept. So from a post-colonial perspective, the development discourse is inevitably tied to the racist division of the world. It is the following discourse of the colonial civilization discourse. And the problem here is that also progressive definitions such as within the SDGs are not really a solution to this problem, because the idea behind all of this is still in the SDGs that there is an underdeveloped world and a developed world, which is a very problematic concept. So for the decolonization of volunteering for development, we think it's important to think about different concepts and foundational basis for the activities, which could be indigenous concepts depending on the locality where you work, like the Buen Vivir, the good life concept from Latin America, but also Ubuntu in Southern Africa, etc. But also things like volunteering for social justice would really alter the discourse around volunteering for development activities. And this also leads then to rethink quality standards and to look into quality standards. To just give you an example, if you say it's a quality standard that volunteers should be briefed about the context of their placement, then the question is, if coloniality and privilege, white privilege, global inequalities are not part of the briefing, then you miss a big part of the context of volunteering for development. So really, we should take on a decolonizing lens and rework quality standards, and also ask ourselves, who defines all those standards? Are they mainly shaped by the Global North? Which say did actors from the Global South have in those formulations of those standards? Power sharing and power shift concepts are already been implemented by many IVCOs to look at decision-making processes, which stakeholders have a say in further developed programs and approaches. The localization agenda, which came over from humanitarian aid, here is very interesting to see what is the expertise on the local level. And here we have also in the paper two interesting case studies, one from Sierra Leone from my colleague Victor, and another one from VSO in Southern Africa. So it's interesting to see those those shifts also in the context of COVID-19. Localization will remain an important debate. Volunteer training, the concepts of preparation, debriefing and accompaniment is important to include thoughts of decolonization, such as critical whiteness approaches, but also anti-bias trainings, etc. So here we really see scope for a further development of approaches within these training concepts. And new models such as South-North volunteering, but also South-South are really an opportunity for decolonization, because they change this image, like my colleague said earlier, about the white saviors coming from the Global North. And it would also acknowledge that in the Global North, we can learn a lot from the Global South, and volunteering really should be crisscrossing all over the globe and should overcome this divide between North and South. And then, of course, as we mentioned in the beginning, to decolonize also means reflecting one's own structures within the organizations to see where do we have a diverse group of staff who can also then influence the selection of volunteers, preparation, etc. To conclude, just a few points. It's not possible to put the whole paper here into this short presentation, but just a few concluding points. Many actors in volunteering for development have already engaged in this debate about decolonization and have implemented very interesting measures that everybody can learn from. but still in future, we do see scope for broader frameworks of decoloniality and intersectionality, and to put them really at the center of the activities and to work against exclusive mechanisms and discrimination. And this would mean also that volunteering for development should engage more in the fight against racism as a global structure and ideology that discriminates and excludes. And this ultimately leads to a stronger focus on the much needed change in the global north, rather than looking at solely at the global south, which is happening with the SDGs, but really for the mainstream societies in the global north, we do need to think about those dimensions of change that are important to work at in the global north. Thank you very much. Also on behalf of Victor, and we are looking forward to the discussion.
Hi, I'm Ashraf Patel from India, co-founder of Pravah and ComMutiny, the youth collective. I have been associated with international volunteering over many years, particularly with the Global Youth Exchange Program and the International Citizenship Service programs of WUSC, along with Pravah, where at one point we were placing 200 international volunteers, youth volunteers in India. Very happy to be here and looking forward to share experiences. Over to you, Erin.
Hi, my name is Erin Bateman, and I'm the Director of Volunteer Cooperation at WUSC, which is a Canadian nonprofit organization focused on youth-centered solutions for improved education, economic and empowerment opportunities in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. I'm also on the board of Forum and co-chair of Forum's Diversity and Inclusion Community of Practice with Ash. When we started to draft notes for this presentation, the first IVCO framing paper, 44 questions about inclusive volunteering for global equality, landed in our inboxes. So many of the questions posed in that paper, so many of the topics we'll be covering over the next few days, have been at least touched on in our community of practice discussions. I would argue that very few of us, perhaps none of us, are new to questions around how volunteerism can lead to a more inclusive and equal world. We are, however, responding to the global call to action, to examine systemic racism in our sector, to shift power, to shift direction, with a new focus and vigor that I haven't seen before in my 2 decades in the sector. As volunteering for development organizations, we want to ensure volunteerism adds value to the systemic change agenda so that our collective effort really does contribute towards a more inclusive and equal world. Forum's global volunteering standard, which we're going to learn a lot more about throughout this conference, holds volunteer involving organizations to high standards around diversity and inclusion. From project design, community engagement, security risk management, partner selection and support, volunteer modality selection, volunteer recruitment and support, right through to how we measure our impact. But how we reach those standards and the inclusive ambition we've set for our own organizations isn't necessarily always a clear path. There's so much to be done all at once, and each of us is tackling bits and aspects in our own way, with learning, success, and failure along the way. So hence the generation of Forum's diversity and inclusion community of practice. In our community, we're very much still at the learning and questioning phase, in some ways articulating the most urgent, relevant questions we need to tackle as a community continues to be the agenda driver for us. We've looked at how we enable inclusive environments within our organizations, within our recruitment, training, and volunteer support structures. We've discussed how we can provide volunteering opportunities to all people, regardless of age, culture, gender identity, sexual orientation, and ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic status, and/or disability. We've run learning sessions focused on decolonizing aid, drawing on relevant webinar resources and articles to build our knowledge and prompt discussion. When we talk about systemic barriers, we turn the conversation to exploring how we can better advocate and influence policy change. When we talk about resource barriers, we share ideas around managing diversity with our limited resources and how we engage our donors to value and better resource our diversity and inclusion agendas. Our conversations have noted, indeed celebrated, the rapid digital transformation of our sector, fueled heavily by COVID, and the opportunities and challenges presented by virtual voluntary service, digital partner engagement, and program management. Speaking for my organization, WUSC, in our rapid shift to e-volunteering from spring 2020, which was a modality we had not embraced before that point, we were very quick to note the change in our recruitment reach. Many of the people dedicating hours of their time in and around their other work and other life commitments, many of them supporting partners on the other side of the globe at 5 a.m. or 10 p.m. at night in Canada. These were not necessarily people who would have been able to volunteer with WUSC previously. For so many reasons, the time, resource, life space commitment that we ask of our international volunteers was not accessible to them, but e-volunteering was. And as such, we were able to connect our partners with individuals with skill sets, perspectives, and experience that we haven't been able to access before. Big win. But all of us working in virtual volunteering have also seen the limitations, and that will no doubt be a topic for future sessions throughout this conference. Our community of practice is a great forum for talking about exactly that, how we practice volunteering and challenging each other to make our practice as inclusive as we can. I'm going to hand over to Ash to elaborate on some of the thinking around reframing international volunteering and directionality emerging out of our community of practice discussions.
Thank you so much, Erin, for placing the context so beautifully. Yes, let's look at how we would like to propose what are the issues of inclusion and equality in international volunteering. The IIVCO papers, 44 questions about inclusive volunteering for global equality by Gerasimos Kovaras, country director of ActionAid Hellas, and the paper To Hell with Good Intentions by Helge Espe, senior advisor for NORIC, both offer a contemporary critique on international volunteering models and make a case to look again at international volunteering directionality for a paradigm shift away from the traditional North-South orientation towards embracing the and valuing of South-South, South-North, local and reciprocal volunteering models. I want to begin by sharing an experience that I have had with Global Exchange, the most outstanding program that was run in partnership with WSO, with UK and many countries, and we were part of it with India. I believe there are certain design elements of this program that offer us a guidance on how we can frame regular international volunteering programs. First of all, the name of a program. Our program, this International Global Exchange, had the word exchange embedded in it. Simple ways of naming a program have a political quality to it, which actually set the context of how the program will be designed. The fact that it was an exchange clearly communicated that both national, international volunteers and communities and the facilitators of the program were all part of a learning of a reciprocal exchange. It was a shared experience. The other feature in the Global Exchange Youth Program was concept of pair share. Volunteers from both countries, India and UK, were paired together to live in communities while they were doing their volunteering experience. And the third feature was that there was placement, volunteer placement was both in the global north and the global south context. So volunteers, the pairs were placed in communities, both in India and in UK. This combination of an exchange of a pair share live-in experience and of placement in both global north and south ensured a power balance. It ensured an experience of powerlessness and an experience of power for all the participants, for volunteers from both India and UK, and created a shared experience, a shared understanding of our common destiny. And instead of looking at problems only from a north-south perspective, we could look at the issues that were relevant, the same issues of inclusion, discrimination, and diversity that were important in both the contexts. This, I think, can be an important insight for us to design our regular international programs, which we normally think that youth programs are different from the normal skill-based professional programs. But it just takes a leap of imagination to pick up the design features and understand that every volunteer has a need to learn, to live together, and to explore society with a whole new lens. Over a period of time, we know that these reciprocal exchanges programs have come down a lot. It has a lot to do with funding. We know that these funding, because of funding, we've had to change tack. And even though we may not have a lot more volunteer programs now sending volunteers from the south to the north, we did have an international citizenship program, which is a variation of the global exchange program, where with VSO, we together ensured that the element of reciprocity was maintained, even if Indian volunteers were not going to UK. And how we made that happen is by having national volunteers paired with international volunteers in India in a location that was community location that was new to both. So we again created a shared equal experience of learning and leadership. This is just an example of how we can do things, but I do want to take one more aspect of international volunteering and how can we reframe it. If you look at three core issues that we are facing together as humanity, as a world, I think we can frame it as inequality. Inequality, according to Oxfam International reports, across the world has really increased. Conflict of ideology and identity issues, rampant again across the world. And ecology, the issues of climate change. So inequality, conflict, and ecology, if we will look at it as the ice that we need to thaw, and the real development issues, these are together, then this is what international volunteering has to deal with, has to break. And we believe that maybe what we need to do is reframe our volunteering programs as volunteering and international solidarity initiatives. So international solidarity becomes embedded into every volunteering program. You are not volunteering to solve problems alone. You're volunteering to come together, to create a shared understanding. Chris Meloria from East Anglia University, in one of his papers, has also put a direction towards this and talked about, we don't need to talk about volunteer for inclusion alone. We need to talk about volunteering and inclusion. These are small word changes, but very important in reframing international volunteering. The last thing that I want to mention is the need for us to look at why this divide between international volunteers, national volunteers, community volunteers. With climate change and the whole effort of international communities to reduce the climate footprint, there will be pressure on our international volunteering programs. It is e-volunteering will never replace face-to-face on-ground volunteering, but it is time for us to examine that do we need these hierarchies of pay, hierarchies of benefits, hierarchies of status in our volunteering programs, and can we imagine a world where we can really look at fusing these hierarchies, where all volunteers are one and where all volunteers are working together. It does not matter where, but working together to build solidarities. Alice Claire has written this in one of the IVCO thinking papers, and I would encourage every one of you to please engage with these think pieces in the IVCO conference. We are hoping that IVCO 21 and the thinking pieces produced and the presentations here with all your contributions and the discussions and debate will create this grand convergence and open a new conversation on reframing international volunteering. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. And my presentation will be just an experience, a sharing experience. I would like to share how volunteerism can be used as a social inclusion tool. It's a Togo National Volunteering Agency experience. My presentation will be in 4 items. The one which will be answers to 4 questions. What is the volunteerism of out-of-school youths? Why is it important to develop a volunteering program towards out-of-school youths? And what means have been deployed for to develop some such program and what were the major outcomes we found during this experience. In Togo, we deployed what we call a volunteerism program for young people who are illiterate or have dropped out of school, aged between 18 and 30. And this program aims to strengthen their civic commitment and values of young volunteers, improve their level of public safety, and improve the level of public safety in the cities where they are engaged. The particularity of, or the characteristic of this type of volunteerism is the communitarian volunteerism, the local volunteerism. The youths are recruited in their areas, in their villages, and they work for their villages for 6 months. They are working on activities such as WASH. Most of their missions are related to WASH, water and sanitation and hygiene. And the third objective of this program is to improve the social professional integration of these youths. I will explain you why we decided to look for these 3 types of objective for this volunteerism program. So why was it important for us to develop a volunteerism program towards these young people? The first reason is that before launching this volunteerism program, Togo's volunteerism program was only a graduate matter. Togo volunteerism program was launched in 2011, and it was a program who was launched in a specific social context. Togo was coming out from social crisis, social and political crisis, and there were a lot of youth coming out of from our universities who has not jobs. And so the government designed a program, volunteerism program for youth who came out from universities so that they can be engaged for their nation. And since then, we were looking for a program who involved every youth, because the great majority of youth in Togo did not finish their school, or they are not schooled. So we decided to design a program that involved every kind of youth, even those who do not went to school. So the choice to design this program is guided by ambition to give a chance to those of thousands of young people who did not go to school, or who have any qualification that could facilitate their integration in the labor market. It's a way for us to give them an alternative to a self-achievement. Much of in Francophone context here, where you do not go to school, it's such like you lose your life. You can achieve yourself. So through this volunteerism, we want to give another chance to those youth who do not go to school to say that we can be scientists. We can do something in our life through engagement in our communities. The second ambition was to consider their needs. Many development programs do not take into account this kind of youth. They focus on those who can read or speak French. These youth are let aside many of time. The third ambition is to protect a large proportion of these young people who have completed their vocational training and cannot open their own business, which leads to a large number of unemployed young people living in precarious conditions with all the possible consequences. And we know West Africa is now facing a great challenge, is insecurity. And with jihadist groups who are emerging, these types of young people are their targets. And because of this type of profile, we decided to build a program, a volunteerism program that combines civic commitment and social integration. And what do we discover in launching this program or experiencing in the first years that we are experiencing this program? First of all, we discovered that in line with the national situation, women represent the majority of the volunteers and they are often aged between 18 and 25. And for all ages, 84% of them are in couples, and most of them stop their studies at the first cycle of secondary school. The second the major discovery is that most of those women have stopped their studies or vocational training because of the death of a close family member, an early pregnancy, or an experience of sexual abuse, harassment or abuse, and any kind of abuse. It's a discovery that reoriented this program. Most of them are women, so large proportion of out of school who are targeted by this program are women, so their needs should be taken in account. Second reason is that these women, the link always their school, their studies, they're stopping their studies with a problem of a death of a family member, someone who is supporting them, or with someone who is supporting them. And which means have been deployed. Such profile led us to develop three answers. First of all, we developed a gender equity policy with the help of Crossroads International. The second one, we developed a training program adapted to their socioeconomic needs, such as life skills training, entrepreneurship, during the 6 months of their missions. And the third means we deployed is to a financial education through what we call Village and Saving Loans Associates with the NGO Plan International. I will let the link of these means in my presentation so that you can be more informed about it. And Village Saving Loans is a program developed by many NGOs, international NGOs in West Africa. And what were our major outcomes? 7,000 of young people, including 18,000 women, benefit this program. And through the VSLA, Village Saving and Loans groups, they saved these women. We were focused on what it brought for women. They saved around $113 $100,000 we saved just for 2020 and 2021. And this program has indirectly provided additional income to volunteers, more than 60 of whom have been integrated in the labor market through an income. This is a specific experience, this is a specific experience of how volunteerism can be used as a tool to improve, to promote social inclusion. And this program was focused on women, which are the majority of that program. Thank you, Melanie.
Greetings to our audience members around the world. My name is Tina Cruz-Hubbard, and I am the Chief Diversity Officer at Peace Corps. It's so good to be with all of you virtually and to discuss this important topic of creating an inclusive volunteering environment for global equality. I'd like to thank the organizers and my fellow panelists for their contributions, and I hope to add to this distinguished group some of the lessons learned and approaches that we've used at Peace Corps. I'll be framing my comments based on the 3 questions posed to the panelists. First is about how different forms of diversity, such as age, gender, race, disability, socioeconomic backgrounds, etc., can be embraced by our international volunteer programs. Question 2 asks us to look at barriers and challenges and how to increase access and equitable experiences. And the third is linking to sustainable development goals. For those of you who are not familiar with Peace Corps, we're a US government agency whose mission is to promote world peace and friendship through these 3 goals. 1, to help the people of interested countries in meeting their need for trained individuals. The second goal is to promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of the people served. And the third is to promote a better understanding of other peoples on the part of US Americans. This is a big year for Peace Corps as we've been celebrating our 60th anniversary. The majority of our volunteers serve within the country, integrated into a community setting for 27 months. However, we also have shorter term engagements, and we are now piloting virtual service, which we're really excited about, particularly under this pandemic. For us, programs serve in countries by the request of their government. We're always operating at the intersection of the country's national priorities, a local community's needs and resources, as well as the Peace Corps' volunteer skill sets. And as I mentioned earlier, volunteers live and work in communities alongside counterparts to address challenges in agriculture, community economic development, education, environment, health, and youth development across the globe. So that's a little bit about Peace Corps. Peace Corps is powered by people, whether it's the country leaders, the host communities, the host families, counterparts, local staff, US staff, volunteers and return volunteers and their families. We are all people dedicated to a single mission. And each of us as individuals bring with us culture, values, attitudes, beliefs, behaviors that show those values, attitudes, and beliefs, differences, and biases that come with that. We have a myriad of identities that are anchored in histories and in systems and institutions. So that's the complexity that not just Peace Corps, but many of you all grapple with as we think about making change in the world in the most meaningful and respectful way possible. So what does this look like in the practice within Peace Corps? This is just a snapshot from our website, and it's a number of stories, as you can see, how the diversity of volunteers is changing or is being highlighted more. There's two on this page that I highlight in yellow circle. One is about an Afro-Latina Peace Corps volunteer who becomes more in touch with her heritage through her service. Another in the bottom right says, my shifting identity as a bicultural volunteer in Nepal. These are some of the ways that we see diversity show up in our Peace Corps volunteers. This example on this page features a story of an older American who is serving or who served and grew up in the inner city in one of our large cities in the United States, then joined the military, and then later continued to serve as a Peace Corps volunteer. I believe she was 60 and 62 in her last points of service with Peace Corps. And here's a few more featured stories. This one on the upper row is about serving in Albania and how it helped this individual develop pride in her Jewish identity. Another one about serving as an indigenous person who is also out and identified as gay within the context of his service. And then a Haitian American feeling like he was returning home in his service by his return to the island of Hispaniola. And this is another example broadening the breadth of how we look at diversity. And this is both featuring staff as well as volunteers. On the left is a staff of from Ghana who talks about the impact of deaf volunteers in Ghana. And on the right is a returned Peace Corps volunteer who served as a deaf volunteer in Ghana on various projects in education and arts as well. So because of this complexity of where our volunteers serve and how our staff support the communities and the volunteers, we put up a structure that we call ICDEI. It's in order to address these realities and also increase equitable access and experiences. So we've intentionally added the IC for intercultural competence to the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we really view all of these things working together like a gears in a system. The IC is that skill of choosing effective and appropriate behaviors in any given context. It might all change. The D is for diversity, or another word for differences. And the E stands for equity, recognizing that differences may be valued or devalued in a society and built into systems and institutions. So we need to consider the role of power, privilege, and institutions. The I is for inclusion, not just for the fact of including people, but that doing so in a way that they themselves feel valued and appreciated and whole in the process. Another tool that we've introduced to our volunteers and staff is simply referred to as self-other bridge. This we consider like a core muscle that everybody must constantly use. The first part around self is analyzing one's own beliefs and world's views. The second around other is practicing non-judgmental perspective taking in order to seek to understand people different than oneself. And lastly is building a bridge, using this awareness to choose actions that can serve as a bridge to create understanding in order to further a shared goal. And so again, this is a practice that we've built into both volunteer and staff competencies. And within all of these, there is a consideration of privilege, of power dynamics, of historical context, and systemic inequalities and inequities. The self-other bridge frame is the way we've addressed this at an individual level. However, it's important to note that we've engaged in looking at this as a system as well. So since 2015, we have supported staff around the globe at all of our posts with a deep dive 5-day or 40-hour training workshop that addresses these concepts within ICDEI. So these trainings are customized to the local context, and it facilitates discussions not only of their own cultures and the diversity within that country context, but the hierarchies and differences within that context, as well as addressing the intersection of US American diversity and the different dynamics it might present within that context. Ultimately, when we take this knowledge and then build it into every one of our key business processes, we ensure that we have integrated ICDEI and that we are supporting the breadth of the diversity that's present. Just to name a few processes, we ask ourselves, are we recruiting potential volunteers, and are we asking ourselves, what might be the barriers for underrepresented populations to serve? How are we addressing socioeconomic barriers? How are we seen by communities of colors as an opportunity? Are we ensuring that people with disabilities are represented in our advertising and that we have systems to support them, both as staff and as volunteers? How do we support our volunteers and our staff related to racism, either in the local context or within the United States context and current events? How do we support safety, security, medical issues for our diverse populations? These are all questions that we grapple with and we ensure that we have at the center of our roles and processes as we try to be as equitable as possible, and we are striving for that. And as an organization, we have been on a continuous learning path to ensure that we're addressing this at all levels until it essentially becomes the way we do business. This is a snapshot of one of our internal presentations. But just to give you some ideas of how we've done this, we have had intentional discussions at senior levels about decolonization, saviorism, systemic equities, how all of those things relate to our work. We're building it into agency strategic plan with an eye towards equity. We've articulated both intercultural competence and diversity, equity, inclusion into our volunteer competency models to both create, model, and hone these skill sets. We've done seemingly little things that have become big, like having live translation during our global town hall events, offering multiple times. We have a saying now about time zone equity and making sure that we have meetings that also accommodate different time zones around the world and not just headquarters. And we're building out a learning path that includes unconscious bias and opportunities to learn more about systemic equities, whether it's related to race, gender, sexual orientation, age, ability, and religion. And in all of this, we are centering the local communities and their needs, understanding their perspectives, historical context, and the role that might play. And so it really is a group effort to step by step try to ensure that we have an eye towards culturally sensitive diversity, equity, and inclusion supports. So thanks so much for your time today. And I really look forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists and your questions. Take care.
Welcome everybody, and can I just invite our panelists to share their video and sound so that we can begin what I think will be a terrific conversation after such impressive presentations. While our panelists are joining us, can I remind people to post their questions for our session this afternoon in the Q&A box rather than chat, but also to really encourage our audience to join us on stage by also pushing their share and audio, video and audio buttons. That will be terrific. So I'm just waiting now for a couple more of our panelists to join us. Welcome Ben, Erin and Ash, I can see you. I'm hoping that others will be joining us in just a moment. While we wait for Victor and Edem to join us, I might kick off with the moderator's prerogative and ask a question to get our conversation started if our panelists that are in front of me don't mind. Erin, Ash, can I ask one of you, what does it mean in terms of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for IVCO? How should they plan to take forward some of the things that you've learned through the community of practice?
Erin, should I? Okay. Should I go, Erin?
Thanks, Ash.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the one is we'd like to do a little bit of selling, hard selling here. We would love to have many more members here to join the community of practice or forum on diversity and inclusion. For 1 year, like Erin mentioned, we have been engaged in very, very deep conversation and getting an idea of the different perspectives on different.
Unfortunately, Ash, I think we've got some trouble with you too, which is really tough. I'm so sorry. Do you want to jump in, Erin, and pick up where Ash left off while her internet recovers for us?
Sure. I think we were moving in the direction of talking about the year ahead and building on the momentum coming out of this event. I think there'll be incredible fodder for our discussion, and we're looking to take the learning from the last year and perhaps select a particular key area and go a bit deeper as a community and really try to action plan what we can do within our organizations, how forum can work to support organizations in taking this agenda forward. So I think there's incredible potential, and just to echo Ash's invitation to the group, that we really are keen, to ensure that we are as diverse and representative as a community as possible, and would really welcome all members to join us. You're very much welcome at the table. So thanks.
Thank you, Erin. And I do have a question waiting, but Tina, just because I don't want you to miss out, I've asked everybody else that question. I'm really intrigued by your model, and I would love to understand what challenges, if any, you faced as you sought to embed that model across your organisation.
Thanks for your questions and greetings to everyone. I think the challenges involve anytime you're doing change management across an organization, and one that is globally located, around the world, that's certainly one of the factors. There's an organizational culture I will say the other issue, and I think this is true for the entire, volunteering community, is at times when you have good people doing good things around the world, it's hard sometimes to see some of the things that are really difficult questions at the center of our work. And to have the courage, the humility, the curiosity to understand, engage, as Ashraf and Erin have been saying, engage in deeper dive questions to understand what it can look like, sound like, and feel like across the standards that Ben mentioned, et cetera. I think those are some of the challenges, is just getting everyone on the same page, having tackling these questions with the kind of grace and courage that allow us to do our deepest work, and doing that at all levels, not just individually, but looking at how then it affects groups and then institutionally. I think those are challenges that we all face in any change management, but particularly this type of effort. Thanks.
Thank you, Tina. Welcome back, Ash. Great to have you back with us. I'm now going to go to the live stage and let one of our audience in. And can I ask people to identify themselves and the organisation that they're from as they ask their questions of our panellists? Welcome, Cristina. No, Cristina may not have a question for us. I'm not sure if she can hear us. I do have a question, a couple of questions coming through. Ben is unfortunately not with us, but Tina, I do have another question for you. Is there specific training activities for self-other bridge concepts?
So we have a whole range of different trainings that are paired with self-other bridge, but we really like to think about it as a muscle. And so if you can think about the self part is, are you entering the engagement with curiosity and knowledge about yourself? Can you critically take a look at what your worldview has been influenced by, the various herstories that you've been taught, the context that you're in? So that's that self part that allows for critical self-reflection. In terms of the other, and I know that can sometimes be a charged word, but we were doing it across so many languages that it was the simplest word to choose, but really thinking neutrally, any trainings or exercises that can allow someone to practice being in the realm of non-judgment, or suspending judgment, or attending to judgment and that's where the interplay of what my worldview is and what someone else's worldview and herstories might be. That's where that is really key in any training exercise or reflection exercise. And then that third part is sometimes the hardest part we miss. And that is, how do we build an intentional bridge that takes into account the different historical pieces of it, that interplay between how two people or two groups or communities are coming together. So there are many exercises and trainings that can fit into that. The core is that dynamic of critical self-reflection, understanding while suspending judgment of other perspectives, and looking at the range, including how power, privilege, and systemic inequities interplay with that, and then building that bridge.
Thank you very much.
That answers the question.
Thank you very much, Tina. Ash, now that you're back with us, can I ask you, you referred quite a bit to the use of language and the significance and importance of thinking carefully about the words that we use, the implications that they have in the way that we use them. What are some of your reflections, lessons about the use of language? Have you seen organisations doing it increasingly thoughtfully across the globe through the work that you were doing?
I think So thanks. I think in terms of whether people are learning from us or other places, I think they share credit wherever a language is being applied well. And I feel we still have a long way to go. Like I mentioned, we are not yet there, but in the current, like in this conference, now I feel I can see that so many organizations are putting their lens on this conversation of North, South, South, North, reciprocity. I mean, reciprocity was in our language of international volunteering right from the beginning. So while it was there in the language, it was in the translation of it on the ground that is actually also important. And so while language is critical, but the intentionality and the action around it is actually key. Otherwise, the words remain words. And I really like the way, I just want to share the way Cristina and all have shaped their frame. And I think things like that, in terms of solidarity, how do you build solidarity? The issues can be layered after that. But to me, volunteering is about understanding the shared destiny. And I feel that language is not yet there across the volunteering programs. The shared destiny of discovering what is the real, how are we going to solve the problems together? So I think that's very key. I just want to add one more thing. This concept of power and privilege we are using in international volunteering, there is another addition to it, which is purity. The whole idea how power and privilege leads to stories of purity, and it creates the divide and the conflict that occurs across the world. The stories of purity and therefore superiority, that one group knows better than the other. One group can solve the problems better than the other. That only creates the divide. So for me, international volunteering and solidarity must bring in the concept of purity as well. The stories of purity that have to be broken as a start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ash. Victor, welcome. Terrific to see you. We've lost Ben, but we've gained you. We've got a couple of questions around the localization agenda, and in particular, what does real and authentic localization look like? Victor, I might ask you to comment on that, but certainly open to the broader panel also. Victor, are you able to hear us?
Thank you for having. The work that Ben and I did was quite inclusive of. Can you hear me?
We can, Victor. Thank you. Yes, we can. Oh, we've lost him. Well, I'm going to open up the question to everybody else that's here. Erin, Ash, Cristina, localization, what does it really look like? Authentic localization. What is your experience of that as you've seen it, have you traveled around the world, have you seen in your own work? Ash, can I start with you?
Okay, I thought I'd taken too much of the bandwidth, so I thought maybe others would like to share. I think, so my experience is a lot limited to our work on international volunteering with BSO in India in the context of localization. And I just want to bring that into context. I think the core that I experience is decision-making, design. These are 3-4 things is how a localization happened, because everyone, all the stakeholders were involved in design right from the beginning. So what happens is you build capacity while you're doing any program, initiating it. You're not only building capacity of all the stakeholders, you're ensuring that the philosophy is co-created, the principles and the policies are co-created, and then the practice gets embedded. So localization to that extent has happened considerably in India, wherever we have engaged with this programming in collaboration with our stakeholders, both internationally. And all the volunteering programs then have embedded practice to as far as possible. Funding is a big constraint, but as far as possible, even at the local level, the practice is embedded. It's learned forever. Till some powerful force comes and changes the language and changes the context. But yes, it gets embedded. I've seen that a lot in our national programs with youth volunteering. Thank you.
Thank you, Ash. Tina, Erin, examples, evidence, experience of true, authentic localization.
I'll add to Ashraf's particular word around co-creation. I think having a strengths-based, co-created space where the needs of the community are at the absolute center is the key piece of it. And then also we have, as I mentioned in our presentation, thinking about it in a cultural context of what does that look like in a culturally sensitive, effective, and appropriate way. Because oftentimes we might have the shared vision and idea and goal and be coming in this way, you know, equal with one another as co-created partners, but we might not do it in a way that is culturally sensitive and appropriate. So I think that's another aspect of localization. And then as we layer on the elements of diversity and equity and inclusion in our work, and what that looks like in terms of localization, we're very sensitive to ensure that whatever in our case, the US view of diversity, that it's not projected onto the local communities either. So when we are layering those concepts and the complexity of the local culture, we are making sure that we are informed by local human rights groups, understanding what does the dynamic look like as it relates to all these different aspects of diversity as well, so that we're not additionally projecting our view of gender or our view of whatever element of diversity it is. So I think it's really key in localization to be anchored in the community, centering their voices, their experiencing, understanding it, using that self-other bridge entree point to ensure that there's that co-created perspective as Ashraf mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tina. I have another question here from Cecilia Thomas, which is, what are your experiences and lessons learned regarding the management of diverse volunteers by host organisations in a country context where there may be some real limitations for potential volunteers? For example, homosexuality may be illegal in a particular country context, and yet we want to promote diversity and inclusion. Experiences, examples, challenges around how organisations have dealt with some of those things? Victor, are you able to hear us? I think Victor's still struggling. I'm terribly upset. And I know I have a question for Edem, but yeah.
Sorry, my internet is misbehaving. It's going on and off. Whether you could hear me now.
We can hear you now, Victor.
No.
We can hear you, Victor. I don't think you can hear us, though, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm so sorry for having issues with the internet. Always a problem. Probably is because
Poor Victor, beaten by the internet. Can I just go back to that question about, you know, difficult contexts whilst trying to promote diversity in volunteering programs? Experiences, lessons, things that we might think about as organisations to do differently. Ash, Erin, Tina, the floor is yours. Thanks, Erin.
I think there's still huge amount of learning to be done on this particular point. And speaking for my position, we're sort of just at very early stages of really figuring out how to support a diverse range of volunteers, a diverse range of partner portfolios, and make sure that we are giving as much opportunity as possible for people to declare without being intrusive, without demanding information, but rather giving people the opportunity to declare what support they may need from us, or would assist them in their time working in a volunteer assignment, and equally really supporting our partners to understand and train our partners on working with a diverse range of volunteers, what that means in terms of requirements on their side to support, how to try to understand the experience of the individual working with them, and then equally kind of equipping our staff to be in a position to understand and be that. It's sort of a 3-angle approach that we're I think only really sort of trying to get to grips with now, but it's incredibly important and something we've prioritized for our organization.
And Tina, anything to add from your perspective?
Sure. Thank you, Erin and Melanie. There's a couple different layers. The first is that, as Erin said, really supporting staff and understanding the range of differences, how it might be viewed in one context from the volunteer versus the local context, and really creating that bridge. That's where that anchor of self-other bridge is. For us, we have had, at least for 80% of our posts, a 5-day training that covers that for our staff, which is a tremendous amount of time. That's 40 hours on the ground in person that we have often done in multiple languages, and we have customized to the local context to create that safety and that bridge to talk about some of the differences that may or may not be viewed in a different way, that may be need very sensitive and tender engagement with from a staff perspective, and where there might be local differences or even regional or even within the volunteer cohort. So one is just ensuring that we prepare the staff so that they understand that. Secondly is we respect what the context is in the community, while also balancing the volunteers' need for some equitable support. And when we say equitable, we know that particularly for LGBTQ individuals, there may be countries where, you know, as mentioned, it could be very dangerous for them, or that there is, maybe they have never been in the closet, right, in their entire lives, and then all of a sudden service is the first time. And so that specialized support, the staff needs to understand it. We have also developed affinity groups at posts, meaning if people have like experiences within their group, that they can get support. The challenge to that is if they're the only one in the group in a particular context, how do you find support for that? But we try to really have a multiple layered system for that individual support. And then when we're looking at an institution or a systems level, we're in the process right now where we've looked at 13 core business practices that we have at every one of our posts. And we are looking at each business practice, whether it is an administrative one or whether it's a volunteer support one, and saying, for groups that have been underrepresented or marginalized, how are we, how is this core business practice attuned to what their specific needs might be, so that we can alleviate some of the stressors that are not within our range of control in the context of the larger community. So people have the home base to recharge, to become who they are again, and to then have further resilience in our shared work that we do as volunteering. So that's a couple different layers of what we do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. We are unfortunately out of time. I want to thank our panelists who've been coming in and but it's been tough with the internet, but I really encourage people to keep engaging with the sessions. There'll be plenty of opportunity to have wonderful conversations, whether it's in the panel sessions or networking. So please do continue to join us. Thank you so much to our panelists, to Tina, Erin in particular, who've managed to stay on, but also, of course, to Ben, to Edem, to Victor, and to Ash also. Thanks so much for your time this evening. Take care.